Patty and Tasia. We welcome and thank you for joining us from Michigan. This pandemic has been hitting our communities really hard. Black and brown Americans are contracting and dying from COVID at disproportionately high rates. A recent NPR poll showed that households of color have a harder time climbing out financially from the impacts of the pandemic. Our schools were never equal, and COVID has shined a light on the deep inequities of educational opportunities. And as schools go online, some students are going to make significant progress, while many in communities of color will lose ground as a result of the digital divide and additional burdens placed on families already struggling before the pandemic. This is what communities of color are facing and living in this time, and the urgency could not be more clear. We've got 47 days into the election, and now we've come together with grassroots organizers and women of color trailblazers and leaders in Michigan to talk about how COVID-19 has reshaped Michigan as a state, and also a new vision forward that reimagines home, work, education, childcare, and so much more in Michigan and across the country, and what this could all mean for the 2020 election. Why women of color? Well, because we know that we're the ones closest to the pain, and we're the ones who are left to heal our families and to lift our communities. And because of that, we're closest to the solutions. We also know that Michigan is a critical swing state, and that the work of Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, State Senator Stephanie Chang, Mothering Justice, Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, ACLU Michigan, and other organizers and activists you'll hear from today, their work is critical. In 2016, Donald Trump won the state by a little over 10,000 votes. Over 200,000 women of color didn't vote in the election, and yet women of color will decide and determine the results of the election in November. We also know from our work at She the People that women of color, both in the state and across the country, are highly inspired and mobilized around a racial and economic justice agenda. So women of color will lead the way. We know that when women of color show up, we don't show up alone. So we're grateful for our co-hosts, Economic Security Project, Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, and Mothering Justice. And I want to turn it over to Mothering Justice Michigan Director Ebony Taylor, the wonderful Ebony Taylor, to tell us all about what's going on in the ground in Michigan right now. Ebony?
Thank you so much, Aimee. That's a great synopsis of what we are dealing with and the work that lies ahead of us to get women of color to the polls. One thing that I must name here is this normalized expectation that women of color will figure it out, right? Our society, our leaders, we ourselves have normalized the expectation that we will do the best we can with what we have, especially Black women, turning nothing into something, no matter how small the input. And this also applies to public policy and politics too. The thought is that we will continue to vote a particular way, and we will just work with whatever comes out of an administration policy-wise, and we'll just make do. Those days are over, and we require that candidates for any office get way more sophisticated around centering and esteeming the issues that impact our lives. This year here in Michigan, Mothering Justice, in partnership with the National Women's Law Center and the awesome posters at Vision, Strategy, and Insights, conducted 2 statewide polls. The first, conducted in early February pre-COVID and released in March, captured Black women voters' thoughts on the upcoming election. And the numbers are just staggering. The significant majority of respondents at 83% say that political candidates are not present in or engaged with their community. Almost 8 in 10 at 78% say that politicians are ignoring their concerns. And over 75%, say that political candidates are not working to address issues most important to them. And this has to change, and we will hold this up as unacceptable when candidates vie for our vote. The second poll, conducted in May and June and released in August of 2020, asked women of color in Michigan about COVID-19 and their experiences with issues that were vulnerable, just in being honest, that were vulnerable pre-COVID, like Black maternal health, quality and affordable childcare, and paid family leave. And during this frightening time, women of color, especially, are bearing the brunt of working the frontline jobs that put them at risk of COVID-19 exposure, along with facing high unemployment rates. Women of color have been dealing with social and economic inequalities before COVID, and the pandemic has only exacerbated conditions, so that now many have surpassed their point of crisis. 8 in 10 women of color in Michigan reported being affected by COVID-19. 2/3 of all those that responded reported being affected financially by COVID-19, including a reduction of work hours, getting furloughed, losing their job, and being forced to quit to care for someone else. For us, for women of color with children in our households, 4 in 10 are essential workers, and most don't feel safe at work. And finally, an overwhelming majority of Michigan's women of color voters are overall eager for systemic change around these issues, like the ones I previously mentioned. But at Mothering Justice, along with our partners here on this call, we are committed to keeping these issues uplifted and keeping our ear to the ground around how mamas and women of color are impacted by COVID and issues they want raised around this upcoming election. And Danielle Atkinson, who you all will hear from very shortly, and the founding director of Mothering Justice, says something that I really like. And she said that when women of color voters, when we're excited, we win. And that is absolutely true. And I think if we keep our issues raised and our ear again to the ground, that we'll get the wins that we want.
I mean, the numbers say it all. Ebony, thank you so much. We're now going to welcome, I'm very excited to welcome one of our champions, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, with Michigan's 13th congressional district, includes Detroit and the surrounding communities. Good to see you, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you so much to all the incredible, beautiful women of color that are in the forefront of fighting against oppression and fighting against the othering politics that we continue to see, and very painful for many of our families.
We heard a lot. Yeah, we heard a lot. There's community colors facing the pandemic, racism and economic crisis, police violence, voter suppression. It just goes on and on. Talk to us more about both the challenges and opportunities that you see in Michigan.
I think, Aimee, one of the key things to realize is many of our families were already in survivor mode before this pandemic, especially women of color. I mean, they were living check by check. They were already living with broken systems like our cruel and broken healthcare system. They were dealing with the fact that they were already in unsafe worker conditions. And then now during this pandemic, it's even gotten worse and more deadly for many of our families and our neighbors across the nation. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, from those that are fighting to get their water back on during this pandemic, those that are fighting to making sure that they are able to provide for their families. But there's opportunities because, you know, for me, transformative change doesn't happen with who's in the White House or who's in Congress. It happens in the streets when we all really push back and demand it. And I learned that from Grace Lee Boggs, who believed in the consciences. When it's awoken, magic can really truly happen in meaningful action. But our communities right now, as you all know, need to extend that $600 federal pandemic unemployment compensation. We need to provide stimulus payments, reoccurring payments. You know, my Automatic Boost to Communities Act, which is we call the ABC Act, that would allow, and again, other nations have done this, other countries have done this, where they have reoccurring payments, and I'm asking for $2,000 per month during this pandemic, and then $1,000 a year after that, $1,000 after that, because yes, we are all very much, from Mothering Justice to Detroit Action, to many of the organizations that I work with in my district, which is the third poorest in the nation. We know these moratoriums, we work together to get these moratoriums in place, but these are Band-Aids. We all know that rent is still going to be due when this pandemic's over. If anything, it's going to get worse for them as it all piles on. So it is critical that we support really bold, meaningful action like the ABC Act, which expands and makes sure that we include everyone, not just some. I think it's really important to include, talk to folks that are really directly hit by this doing nothing politics. We all feel the sense of urgency. Women of color get it because we're done waiting. I mean, how many times have you heard women of color say, I'm tired of waiting, I'm sick and tired. There's this sense of urgency that comes from many of us because our lens is so beautifully unique, but also the pain of that oppressive kind of policies that we've seen so many years and the decades and decades is really kind of shedding this light. And being here, I can see that people just don't get how much pain is happening on ground. So it's important that we stop these kinds of like corporate bailouts. I want all my colleagues, Ebony should have been at the committee hearing where my colleague didn't want to help local governments, they bail out big banks in 2008-9. And then, my colleague is talking about airlines with this sense, like they were talking, like as if you heard a woman of color talking about her child, got to protect her child. I mean, I wish there was a sense of passion and urgency when it came to women and came to families. But you see that. So we have to push back against this idea around let's do corporate bailouts, because I'll tell you, when we do bail out these corporations, they still let go of women of color in the workplace. We see it over and over again. The other really important thing, and you all know I'm very passionate about this, so many people talk about masks, they talk about sanitizer, talk about social distancing, but one thing that I know can save lives is making sure people have access to water. Water needs to be a human right. Before this pandemic, but even more now during this pandemic. And so emergency water is a human right bill that I push forward is in the HEROES Act. Aimee, it's $1.5 billion. It would require reconnection, but it also goes directly to the families, not the utility companies, not the water authorities, to the families. And it would help 15 million Americans across the country that are facing water shutoffs. And I know it's something very dear and close to my district, because people don't realize the criminalization that comes with a lot of the harms that can come of being poor in our country. Poverty is so much a disease that will continue to hurt families. And hearing mothers who get their water shut off and then Child Protective Services to be called on them the next day for neglect, to get their child taken away from them, money that could be used, not to put their child in foster care, but could be used to put their water back on. It's that kind of lens that we bring to this table. When we talk about these issues, we bring that sense of urgency, understanding that just the ridiculousness and just the harm and inhumane policy of saying, well, let's spend the money in taking children away from a mother, than saying, you know what, you're right, water has become unaffordable. We need to help you. We're going to get you access to water right away. And these are just some of the things that we could be doing right now and talking about these issues. But I always want to leave, and I know many of you know her. She is incredible, Sonia Renee Taylor, but I want to leave folks with this quote because it moved me, and I feel like it will inspire many people that might be listening to this. But she said very powerfully, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than that we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We have been given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature." And I know women of color see this as an opportunity because, if anything, this pandemic has shown the ugly face of the economic divide in our country, showed the ugly face of our broken healthcare system, and so many things that we all are very much fighting for now. But again, the courage of many, and I think Ebony's right, people always think we can figure it out, and it does take a lot of courage, but it is the fact that we're kind of tired of removing this sense of urgency that I just hope people don't see it as, dismissing it as, oh, look, they're angry. Oh, look, no. We have been waiting for a very long time, and even during this pandemic, you are not seeing us. You're not hearing us. And women of color are so tired of not being heard and seen. And so I just want to thank all of my incredible partners, all the people that are on this call. Know that you're so needed. We are inspiring even the younger generation that I see in the streets during this historic uprising. I see them. I know they're going to continue the legacy we've created in pushing back against all of the things that I think are so broken and so oppressive. So thank you so much to all of you. Continue the fight. I'm here with you as your partner. I'll tell you, they may not have been ready for me in the United States Congress.
They weren't ready. They weren't ready, Congresswoman.
No, but I just can't wait. Aimee knows this. I want more of you to run. I need more partners in Congress. So as we all are fighting for meaningful change in policy, I hope you're all also considering running for office.
I have to take a beat after you said all of that. You brought so much clarity, fierceness, and so much of us seeking justice is first calling out the injustice and calling us all in for the work ahead and not looking at where we're at as a dead end, but a new opportunity. I thank you for those words. I'd love to invite some of these amazing Michigan organizers and leaders into the conversation, Congresswoman. Two incredible leaders and activists joining us in the conversation to reimagine basic needs and infrastructure. State Senator Stephanie Chang and Nicole Hill are joining us now, one of the plaintiffs bringing a class action lawsuit against the city of Detroit to make water affordable and permanently end water shutoffs. Nicole and State Senator, so glad to have you with us. And let's just start with you, Nicole. The nation knows about Flint, Michigan. I actually think people don't understand that the problem in Flint and other places in Michigan has not been solved because it happened a long time ago in the nation's public consciousness, but there's a bigger issue with the water access, which is more critical during this pandemic. Detroit has one of the highest water rates in the country. Can you tell us about your experience?
Oh, my experience was in 2014. I had relocated recently from a previous address in Detroit. I initially came back and returned to the city from Hurricane Katrina. So I kind of have already seen what mismanagement by government could cause, the devastation. I remember there constantly being water infrastructure issues in my neighborhood that they would never inform the residents of. We would just wake up some days and our water wouldn't be on. And when I was paying my water bill every month, I think I was paying roughly somewhere between $350 and $400 per month just for water. And I contacted the water department on several occasions to question why my bill was so high. I actually paid for a plumber myself because they refused to send a plumber out to check everything in my house for leaks, cracks, infrastructure issues. There were none. And despite that being the case, they could not give me an explanation to why my bill was so high. So one day in May of 2014, I got up, I took my kids to school, came back to wash the dishes. I had no water in my home. And I contacted the department and was told that my water was shut off for lack of payment, despite the fact that I had just paid them $350 approximately 3 days prior to my water being disconnected. So being that I've always been involved in some type of activism or community outreach, I think it was inbred in me from childhood. I contacted the Department of Human Services. My daughter at the time was then 6.5. She went with me. There was nothing they could do when they contacted the water department, refused to accept any payment that they had. And the social worker then informed me directly in front of my daughter that that was grounds for removal of my children from my home. She didn't say, well, let me see if I can find any other options to help you. Let me see if I can connect you to any other outreach agencies. It was just, well, nothing we can do, and it's grounds for removal of your children. So I immediately got my children placed outside of my home with family members and friends. And due to the fact that I lived in a community that had a pretty high crime rate, I decided to stay in my home, and I went through the next 2 months without running water in my home. And that's how I contacted through resources I had provided for other parents, especially single mothers in my neighborhood. I got in contact with an agency called Michigan Welfare Rights, which then proceeded to start helping me, and that's how I became part of the class action lawsuit and started sitting in on the bankruptcy hearings that the city of Detroit was going through. And as a layman myself, I immediately realized that a lot of these shutoffs were being conducted not because these people were not, the residents were not trying to pay their bills. They were paying their bills. They paid what they could afford to pay. And that's the key word there, affordability. Water is not affordable in Detroit. Detroit owns their water department. Let me start by saying that. They're one of the few cities, if not the only one in the United States that actually owns their water department. It's not owned by the county or by the state. And yet, as owners, speaking of the residents of Detroit, we pay retail for our water, but we supply water to roughly 126 municipalities and townships outside of Detroit. They get their water from us at wholesale prices, pennies on the dollar, while we pay full price for our water and support the cost of the infrastructure as well. And at the height of the shutoff, they shut off close to 250,000 people in the city. As of right now, in the midst of COVID, which why the city is even putting this off on their residents is beyond belief, as literally in 2016, we went through a huge hepatitis A epidemic in Detroit when we still had people shut off that could not provide proper sanitation for themselves and their family. And these are the same people that were essential workers then, and they're essential workers now. And they have to go out of their homes because they don't have a choice. They don't have the option to stay at home when they have families to take care of and they're making minimum wage. So if their water is off, they still have to get out because they're thinking, and I know this from personal experience, you're thinking, I need to keep working because I need to make money to get this water turned back on. Or I need to make money to feed my family or buy bottled water, which is just in and of itself exacerbating the crisis because now we're supporting bottled water industries who literally get water from our underground aquifers for nothing. They pay $200 for a yearly permit and they get to pump water out of our underground aquifers when we have residents in our city and in Flint that are either getting contaminated water or can't get water at all.
You know, when
It's
I hear
absurd.
it's absurd. It seems untenable. Let me just ask State Senator Stephanie Chang, who, by the way, we haven't met in person, but I'm so glad you're on the call. When you hear Nicole's story about the system that has allowed this to happen, to punish poor people, I mean, do you respond and agree with the Congresswoman? Is water a human right? What does government need to do to solve this problem from your perspective?
Yeah, well, first of all, so happy to be here. And Nicole is an amazing activist. And I think that actually I first met Nicole back in 2015 when we held a hearing at the state capitol around issues around water affordability. And actually that is because, I'm trying to think, 2015, Rashida and Alice Jennings and Melissa Tomashki reached out to say, can you hold a hearing at the state capitol around water affordability? So I actually reached out then to now Mayor, then State Rep Sheldon Neely to actually put together a hearing. And so Nicole came and shared her testimony, and a number of other people. We had, I think, around 100 people come and share their in Flint. And honestly, it left some of my colleagues in tears because they had no idea. And I'll always remember Julie Plawecki, who unfortunately is no longer with us. She was moved to tears by the stories that she heard. And that's really the power of women of color and others telling their stories about real life issues. And so, I mean, I think that this all hits home even more now during COVID, right? Because you can't wash your hands and you can't make sure that you're stopping the spread of germs or not getting, if you can't wash your hands with water and soap. And so this whole issue of water affordability and shutoffs is directly connected to public health. So in the legislature, at the state level, we've been working hard over the past 6 years to introduce and continue reintroducing, and we'll just keep working until it gets done, legislation that would make water a human right, and that would institute a water affordability plan that would ban certain shutoffs, especially for vulnerable individuals like pregnant women or families with young children, seniors, people with medical conditions that absolutely need access to water. So the thing is, there are solutions out there. We just need to find the political will to be able to put these into law. And so I think that the way we're going to do that is through events like this, through people like Nicole continuing to share what the impact is, and really making that connection with public health, because and with basic needs. And I think that COVID-19, as we've all stated before, is really, the pandemic has shown so many of these inequities. Water is, of course, just one of the issues, but it's so connected, because you cannot live without water, just like you can't live without clean air, just like you can't live without just the importance of housing, food, other basic needs. So it's all connected. We're so proud and so happy that Rashida is there in Congress to serve us and to be our voice. And, especially on issues like this, water is absolutely critical, and so we have to keep the fight going.
Yes, and I appreciate your words. I am continually angered when you say there's no political will in the state of Michigan, and it really calls forward, we need different leaders. If you can't see the pain, you can't hear the pain, you're not willing to take action. So we're going to leave it right there. Nicole Hill, thank you for your testimony and your tireless work on behalf of not only your own family, but I have a whole bunch of people. And I'm really grateful to you. Senator Chang, thank you. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us for this critical conversation.
Thank you, Nicole.
And now I think, let's move on as we talk about now welcoming Danielle Atkinson, founder of Mothering Justice, to join the Congresswoman and myself to talk about something else that impacts women of color are leading on, and that's reimagining the workplace. Welcome, Danielle.
Hey, Amy, good to see you.
During COVID, we saw a drastic change in what work and the workplace looks like. The home, my home, our homes are now the workplaces for many people. And we know that people of color are disproportionately the frontline workers. We've been hearing that time and time again in this conversation. And there's been an erosion of workers' rights, and minimum wage is not keeping up with the inflation across the country. So, Danielle, tell us what you're seeing and you're hearing. What does reimagining the workplace in the age of COVID look like?
Yeah, reimagining, rediscovering, in Michigan, people often say that, when the nation catches a cold, Michigan has the flu. And it's no more evident than what we're facing right now. Michigan is the birthplace of the labor union. We have rights here that really just permeate, and you can see all across the country. And we are so proud of that history. But like you said, in recent years, we have been just eating away at those rights. And we see how hard it is on families in times of crisis. And my friend said to me that what the nation is feeling right now, what everyone is feeling, is what women of color have been struggling with forever. How to balance, how to make ends meet while taking care of your children, while taking care of your parents, while making those phone calls about your special plan for your children, or the prescription drugs that you need to pick up for your parents. All of those things, juggling all of those things And that's what we're dealing with right now. Women of color are more likely to be essential workers. They're more likely not to have paid leave. They're more likely not to have a living wage. And what happens when all of those things come together? It's a crisis. So we have an economic crisis on top of a health crisis, and we have to reimagine what these things could look like. What would it look like if I didn't have to worry about childcare, or I didn't have to worry about losing the money that I would make to pay rent just to stay by my child's hospital bed? What would that look like? And we can do this. The revolutionary is necessary. And we know from the past that these things are all possible, right? When we needed women to make planes and to contribute to the war effort, we made sure there was childcare. And when everyone couldn't go to work and we had to stay home, we found out a way to write checks to everyone. These things are possible. We just need the political will. And we need people to understand that these are rights that they deserve and demand them from their government.
Yeah, and I know, Danielle, you know about the 50, I mean, in the relief for childcare especially during this pandemic, you know, many women in Congress have been pushing the Child Care is Essential Act, which is about $50 billion in relief, but obviously it's just sitting there in the Senate. And one of the things that we heard overwhelmingly is like they're making us choose between taking care of our kids and then trying to go to work. It's this, and the anxiety that comes with all of it, and trying to again, survivor mode, trying to figure it out. When you talked about that saying, I think it was Mayor Coleman Young from Detroit would say, when the rest of folks were getting a flu, you know, Detroit was getting pneumonia, and like we were, you know, but it is that othering politics of, and I think Ebony talked about it, of, I don't know, Danielle, like when they constantly are saying, oh, they'll be fine. It's almost like we are somehow less human. Like the pain of not helping, it's like, we'll deal with it. Like Ebony talked about, I knew exactly what she was talking about. And I watched my mother, you know, raise 14 children, you know, constantly struggle up and downs. But, you know, to all the women of color out there in talking about this economic divide, I mean, what would you hope that they would be doing, like in the workplace? I mean, I see the fear of them organizing in the workplace, organizing for unions. I saw many of them that were pushing for minimum wage in Michigan, the increased minimum wage. You saw that, and that was hijacked. And they're so exhausted. Like, how do we continue to inspire them to just continue fighting and knowing? I mean, I can tell them constantly, it's going to start with us. We're going to continue. But you know, what would you say to so many right now that is seeing this pandemic and thinking, okay, this is it. They see how broken everything is. They're going to fix it.
Exactly. Yes, and we are so tired, and knowing about the inequalities is injuring and exhausting. But I think we need to do what women of color throughout history have done: inject joy in our organizing. I was just, you know, I woke up the other day going, why are we not having all these food trucks at the clerk's office and deciding that October 2nd is election day? Let's all go vote and have dinner, right? Let's all, we need to share our culture, and we need to just embrace what our lives look like, right? Like, we need to do a social distancing play date, you know, like we need to do the things that create community while making our voice heard on the issues that matter, right? But I just saw something too on, you know, Facebook, whatever, where there was a gentleman who ran a taco truck, and the woman who lived there called the police on him. And what did they do? They had a mariachi band, they had 10 taco trucks, and it was a party for the community while they were saying without any question what their values were. So how do we make these politicians hear us while creating community?
I love that, Danielle, because we're not talking about joy. Just what both of you said around, really, we have these pressing, painful problems we're suffering. At the same time, for us to get through the next 47 days to the election, through the end of the year, on to the future, we have to actually connect with each other and bring joy. And just before I let you go, Danielle and Congresswoman, this is to either one of you. You know, when you started your comments at the beginning of our time together, Congresswoman, you talked about championing a bill that would guarantee cash payments for people that could be used to alleviate some of the changes in terms of our work environment or childcare needs or food and shelter. Talk about guaranteed income. Where are we? Talk about your legislation and what it would do for people in Michigan and the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when Danielle was at Mothering Justice, and I know we had a roundtable about mothers and children in Redford Township in my district. And I remember we were talking about kind of, you know, the earned income tax credit, some people EITC, and talking about, you know, where is, you know, everybody always talks about middle class and middle class tax rates, but, you know, what about the working poor? What about that person that's dealing, you know, helping their elderly parents, the caretakers, those that don't qualify for EITC? And I remember that's how we birthed the Boost Act, which would elevate 45% people out of poverty because it was instant tax a credit to you between $3,000 to $6,000 if you made less than $100,000 in our country. And again, it would literally get people out of poverty. 45% of Americans living in poverty would be uplifted out of poverty with that. And so we built up on what is happening with the pandemic, and we said, what can we do? And that's when we created the Automatic Boost to Communities Act and said, this is what we need to be doing. And we looked at what Canada was doing. We looked at other places. And we knew that before it came out that people are going to have a hard time paying their rent. Sure enough, a third of folks couldn't pay their rent. I heard it's even getting increasingly higher now. We knew that water shutoffs was going to increase because people were going to be paying these high, unaffordable, it's all gone up 30%. And so the Automatic Boost to Communities Act, ABC Act, is that care, that direct payment to people. And when we do that, by the way, economists will tell you, I think, Danielle, all of us constantly bring up those scientists because somehow women of color don't get it. Like we have to go and bring them to give us credibility. I still have to do it as a Congress member, but they'll tell you, give money to people because they'll spend it in the local economy. They'll spend it in the community. It would actually stay in the neighborhoods too, instantly. And so there is something beautiful about that. Wow, give people money. And yeah, sure enough, small businesses will benefit, the community will benefit. But what I love more about, the Boost Act, which is the closest to a UBI policy than any other one in Congress now, is it gives people human dignity again. It really does. It allows the family to choose. We're not telling them you can only spend this on food. You can only spend this on rent. We're saying to them, here you go. And they're saying, you know what? I need to spend this on books for my kids so I can help with reading. I'm going to spend this on, somebody told me the other day, like, I really want to teach my son how to swim. Why? Because I think close to 60% Black children in our country don't know how to swim because they don't have access to swimming pools. They don't have access to that, right? Because they're taking all that away. It's like, give people human dignity. Let them have the opportunity to thrive. And so the ABC Act and the Boost Act does that. And, it's so critically important. I wish that folks would just talk to the people living in poverty now, talk to women every day. If they talk more to us, they wouldn't have to talk to the economist and everybody else. And it is hard because we are our own lobbyists. We are our own special interest group, right? We're out there fighting like crazy to make sure that we get a seat at the table. And I want everybody to know, I absolutely adore what Shirley Chisholm did as the first African-American woman in Congress. But she said, if there's not a seat at the table, bring your own chair. I don't know, y'all, like, I'm at a point where I'm like, nah, just go take somebody else's chair, shake the table a little bit. Like, I'm done. I don't need a bigger table. You can't be talking about things that impact people, women of color. Like, you do not, white man, belong at the table. Like, please move away and let a woman of color decide her fate. Give her self-determination. Let her decide. She knows best.
Listen, I always get a 100% Congresswoman and Danielle. Look, universal basic income, with that, how far does that take us along in terms of solving the real impact that the COVID reality has wrought upon our families and communities?
You know, we all experience that. So many of us understand what it means to get a little bit of boost, right? Like everyone understands, like you give me a little bit of money, I can pay the bills that have been backing up. It will make a difference. It will make a small difference, but it also changes the mindset about what policy can do, what our legislative bodies can do and what impact they can make. I think our mindset needs to be changed, and passing this piece of legislation, which again is so revolutionary but so essential to our economy being functional, it would make such a huge difference in how we think about what Congress is capable of.
We know what the old way of thinking is, which is businesses, big businesses first. And in fact, in this last few months, really big businesses got a lot of money, whereas most people got $1,200, if that. So I really thank you very much, Danielle, for your incredible leadership and your partnership with your work with Mothering Justice in Michigan. And as we go on to our final panel, Congresswoman, we're gonna turn our attention now to reimagining education and childcare. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. And the school year started September 8th. 51,000 students in Detroit through in-person or remote learning. I want to welcome Angie Reyes, Executive Director of the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. Hey, Angie. And then Aimee Russell, a student at Cass Technical High School in Detroit. And
Hashtag, you got to do that. It's a Detroit thing, Aimee.
What's that?
It is. It's a Detroit thing. Every time some school comes out, you got to be like technician, Cass Tech.
Okay.
I have a lot of Cass.
You got it. Why don't you call Aimee to call her out, because I gotta learn this.
Yeah, no, she heard me. She knew.
She heard it. She heard it. Aimee, thank you so much. Black Lives Matter in all capacities activist. So glad to have you here. And Cindy Gamboa, a parent of 3 kids in the Detroit Public Schools, moms and students in the house. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And let me just start with you, Aimee. Can you talk about what it's like to start high school in, your first start a new year in high school during the age of COVID?
Hi, so my senior year in the age of COVID and virtual learning has been, to say the least, a whirlwind. Being a senior, specifically in DPSCD, has been really hard because we're in a fight with the district to prioritize what it looks like to virtual learn. Right now, I'm dealing with an 8-hour day. And before, in the summer, we were advocating to go completely virtual. So it's kind of like having a conversation 2 steps behind everyone else. We're constantly trying to advocate for ourselves and make sure that Black and Brown students are being prioritized. During the pandemic, it's just definitely stressed and exposed how the lack of resources that we've been given, and this isn't something that was just created by, drawn out by the pandemic. So definitely my fight has been centering, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, centering minorities in our education with our story, and making sure that we're getting a quality education, virtual or not, and emphasizing that you cannot move the same way that you did in the building virtually.
When I'm listening to you, I just realize how hard it is. I mean, forget about the social aspect for a minute, although that's very important. The educational aspect and the way that people learn, that's a big challenge. I wanted to ask you, Cindy, about the parents' perspective. You got 3 kids, 3 children in the Detroit Public Schools. How has this been like for you?
Geez, Aimee, I don't even know how to answer that right now. Honestly, I have 3 children. I have one, a high school senior. So, I was really excited about senior year, but I'm also really worried about what this means to his last academic year before he has to go to college, right? Is that going to prepare him for, what's to come? I have a middle schooler that, was also just different issues. A lot of just finding himself, his voice. So like the social aspect has really been heavy on him. And then my third child is a preschooler. And quite honestly, I have so much guilt on my mind because I put so much priority to make sure that, my high school student, my middle schooler were all set. And I made the decision to send them virtually. But then I turned around and I forgot, wow, I need to really have a really strong, solid foundation for my preschooler, right? Because there's so much studies, right? I mean, I know my baby needs it. My baby needs to start learning now, because right now her mind is a sponge. She needs this to grow. And I waited to the last minute just because there was so much there weren't any plans. There wasn't transparency when the district would talk about what they were doing around preschool for preschoolers, what was my options. So I really was worried about what the school year was gonna entail for them, both academically, socially, and just, how am I gonna manage all of this? And it's week 3 for my high schooler, because he started before Labor Day. Week 2 for my middle schooler, because he started right after Labor Day. And then my preschooler started yesterday. So I'm here trying to manage all of these schedules. And I'm working a full-time job, which sometimes entails more than 40 hours, because we're in the middle of pandemic, and I work at an amazing nonprofit organization that's really helping service the community. So right now is actually when I had to step it up and actually be here for my community. But here I turn around and I also have to be here for my children, right? So countless number of apps that I had to download. My phone is constantly ringing, either with a robocall or a notification from an app telling me that I have to do, X, Y, and Z. And it's just really hard to keep up with everything. And I'm struggling. And I think about all of the other parents that don't have the privileges that I have. Luckily, I do have a household where we'd had internet access, and I had a spare laptop that actually broke down the day before, school started, but what can I do about that? Which, by the way, I just found out that if I go to any Best Buy in like Metro Detroit, they're all sold out of laptops. The cheapest one I can find is actually $1,000, which is something I cannot afford. I can't even afford to like take my preschooler to childcare at this point. So a lot of things that I had to wrestle with, and I'm also, speaking to family members, working in my community, there's a huge, divide with people that don't dominate the English language. So, if English is not your primary language, there's so many obstacles that you have to, just overcome. Everything that is available to you is go to this website, read up on this, but they don't offer it in your language. And if you don't have access to technology, then you're pretty much in the dark. So many passwords that you have to keep up with, and different platforms. I mean, the district has 20 apps that we have to download for each child. So it's pretty overwhelming, to say the least, on kind of how these last few weeks have gone for me as a parent.
I mean, my heart goes out to you. And if my son wasn't already 22, I would have been dealing with the same thing. Cindy, my goodness. We're not being, I've been hearing that this is a generation, could be a lost generation in terms of academics. And if a family does not, or not able to afford Wi-Fi, that's a whole nother level. If you don't have access to even the education that's offered. And I want to turn to you, Congresswoman. You've been leading the charge, calling for the resignation of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos because of her policies. Tone deaf is a nice way of saying it. Tone deaf policies. I mean, she's never really heard in her heart what Cindy, what Aimee are saying, but that she's decimating public education, increasing racial segregation in schools in places like Detroit. Talk about your work ensuring our public schools meet the needs of our kids and live up to the promise that public school had in this country for a long time, which is being that great equalizer.
Yeah, I think it's really important for folks to know, look, this is really truly intentional dismantling of our public education, but also look at the communities that are directly impacted. It's Cindy's kids, it's Alma. It is communities where I grew up, right? I mean, these are the communities that are directly being targeted. And again, many of the school districts were on survivor mode before. So now imagine now with everything with the pandemic and not having adequate resources. I led a letter, 111 of my colleagues supported it, of the fact that we need to eject about $305 billion. This came from a nonpartisan think tank out there that said, right now, because of loss of revenue for the states, because of what's happening with the pandemic, we know that our schools are going to suffer budget-wise, and I know exactly who's going to get hit the hardest. It's not going to be the for-profit management companies running these charter schools in communities of color. It is going to be the classrooms. It's going to be the kids that are going to have to suffer. And we're already, I don't know if you know this, Amy, like, especially in Detroit, we're already around $7,000 per pupil, per child, even though a majority white, suburban, very wealthy district in Grosse Pointe is at $14,000 per pupil. So just imagine what we could be doing for Alma at $14,000 per pupil, what we could provide. One, she's going to a school that doesn't have clean drinking water. She's already going through a school where some of her teachers are having to work 2 or 3 jobs. So they take off literally a 3. And you see these students so sympathetic with it. And sometimes they don't even have a permanent teacher in the classroom because either shortfalls or because of mismanagement. I don't know what it is. But one of the things to know is that, for myself and for Jahana Hayes, Congresswoman Jahana Hayes, a former teacher, one of these incredible women of color that is serving with me, we have been at the forefront saying we have to put our schools, understand this is months ago before school started. We said, we know it's going to inevitably happen. The other thing, Amy and Alma's going to freak out, but like Betsy DeVos thinks Alma should still be taking standardized tests during the pandemic. Like we're forcing our kids, Cindy, they're going to force our kids to take these standardized tests, to not allow these waivers. And I'm telling you right now, there's going to be a movement. I've already heard students saying they're going to sign off waivers saying they don't want to take the test. I'm all for them supporting that. They don't need to be put in this kind of pressure of these standardized tests that are going to follow them forever. It's going to be putting all this pressure on them. My God, we're in a pandemic. And so we need to be leading with compassion. We need to be understanding. Cindy's not exaggerating about the apps. I have a law degree, Amy, and I can't believe Adam has started high school in Detroit Public Schools, and 3 different apps, just, all of the things that you have to do. You have to figure out a way. I'm a very busy person. So imagine a mother that doesn't have transportation, having to go all the way to the high school. Angie's nodding her head. Angie Reyes and DHCC is nodding her head. Have to go, and I'm telling you, I rushed over there before catching a flight to DC to go. And yes, you don't have to be sympathetic, but I can't imagine somebody like Cindy, who's working full-time at a nonprofit organization, having to figure out transportation. Luckily, maybe she's blessed she has it. She keeps saying that. Imagine somebody, 40% of one of my zip codes don't even have access to transportation, going to go get the books, everything. Now, as somebody, Amy, you don't have to say this. I am so scared of what we're doing to our special needs children. You have no idea, like that is my biggest fear, is the babies out there, and like puts me to tears, Amy, because I hear mothers telling me, my kid has attention deficit disorder. What am I going to do, Rashida? Or my kid is in the spectrum of autism. My kid has all these issues. And they're asking them to just go in front of a screen. Like, no, I had a teacher tell me she, on her own time, goes to the child's home, Amy, takes the homework out of the box so she can do it in Braille. She can do the stuff for Braille, send it back to the child in the box. Like, this is what we're doing to our kids. And I just want to tell people, like, this is just wrong, and it's inhumane. It's just wrong.
It is. It's the picture you're painting is something that we're living through right now. And this conversation, I have to ask you, Angie Reyes, the organization you lead, the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, is part of an education coalition that did a survey of Detroit parents and students on how their first week of school went. What did you learn? And
you're muted, Amy. Angie, you're muted. She's got it. Angie should have surveyed me.
All right, so we're going to ask for some help to help you unmute, Angie. And let me just say, the solution here is a new, or Angie, can we hear you now? The solution here, while we get you set, Angie, is what? Replacing the Secretary of Education. What's the solution for right now?
I mean, well, first of all, again, we're dealing with so many systems that are already broken before this pandemic. So there was inequity in education funding, y'all. Like brown and black communities were not getting the same funding in other communities. Like, why are we basing it on a formula and a need? I mean, we know that children as English as their second language need a little bit of bump. Kids in certain communities that are dealing with all these economic challenges need about, I mean, it is the wraparound services. I think we got, Angie, you want to try?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, so I'm saying you did this survey. You did this survey for parents and students for the first week of school. Was it as ugly as we're hearing in testimony today?
It was very, very much reflected in what you're hearing from both Aimee and Cindy and Rashida as well. So we selected about 300 surveys. So let me just back up and say that the HEC is part of 4H to Forward, which is a citywide education organizing network of students, parents, and community organizations. And this is in the context of systemic issues around education in the city of Detroit that have been happening for a number of years. We had like 12 years under emergency management. We have some of the lowest education funding in the country for the state, and then Detroit is on the bottom of that, as Rashida had mentioned. So already we were struggling with a number of systemic issues. And then with people like the DeVosses, who have been really fighting to divert a lot of the finances and the funding to private schools rather than public education, has really, our schools have taken a hit. So you add on top of that the pandemic, and then people are trying to do virtual learning with the digital divide. It's not only about access to technology, it's also knowing how to use it. So the students actually have developed a list of demands that Aimee had kind of is requesting the district to reduce the number of hours that they're required to be on screen time, because the school really, the district did not take into account that this is a whole different way of learning. So they're trying to have the kids do the same thing that they were doing while they were in person in the classroom, but virtually. It's not working. Kids cannot sit in front of a computer for 6 or 7 hours and learn. I can't sit in front of a computer for 6 or 7 hours and listen to somebody talk and pay attention. I just thank God that my kids are grown and that it's my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren that are now in school that are struggling with this. And I see the things that they're struggling with. So with all the systemic issues that families are dealing with, it really has been highlighted with this pandemic much, much more. And we really are worried about kids falling further and further behind. So all of those levels of frustration that you had heard are really being amplified, and parents and students are really struggling to try to make sense of this new reality that we're in.
It's something that we're all sharing, and I was struck by an earlier comment in our conversation around the rest of the country's feeling what women of color feel every day, and we're uniquely qualified to come up with solutions, local, state, and federal. I want to thank you, Angie, for joining us. Thank you, Aimee. Thank you, Cindy, for sharing your stories. And as we, come to a close for this event, I want to just turn to you, Congresswoman, and this has been an incredible series of conversations. We talked about the major pain points that women of color are seeing and trying to organize to solve in Michigan, but these are national pain points. I mean, when just as in terms of your closing, how you're perceiving all of this, where's women of color leadership showing up in Michigan, and what would happen if the Reimagine Michigan was actually something that everyone all over the country could access, could implement?
It would be moms like Cindy running for local school board. I want to see her at school board. Or, I think there is a tremendous need, again, to be leading a lot of this policy work. I think that's critically important. When you look at Black maternal health, you look at education systems in communities of color, it should be the mothers, the Black, brown, beautiful mothers, leading that conversation of what virtual learning should look like for their child, if English is their second language, if they have special needs, all these other issues. That's what it looks like, and again, it's not bringing your own chair and sitting in the back and hoping somebody will call on you. It is really shaking that table and taking that chair and leading that policy work. I also, really important, a mentor told me this, and I want women of color to know this. Sometimes, and most times in spaces that we're in now, that's why it's important to take these chairs, is because even when you do speak up, you're not heard or seen the same way as when we hear each other. And it is because there is this kind of dehumanization that happens with women of color in these various spaces and policy. And that's why, again, when you reimagine what could we do in Michigan on water, environmental racism, education, immigration, all the issues that are so dear to us, poverty, I think it is going to be where, again, we are the ones showing the direction that we need to go, and how it really is something that helps the whole state. I mean, I don't know how to explain to people where they don't understand that when there's no clean water in Flint, that is going to impact you. And sure enough, in communities in my district that are not predominantly African American are now seeing lead in their infrastructure. So don't turn your back on broken systems that are in communities of color, because it will lead into your communities. It will lead the broken education system. Don't believe that just because we're out there and we were crying for years about this movement to dismantle public education. I mean, women of color were leading that fight and really turned, backs were turned on us and speaking out against that. And now we're seeing it in communities outside of, city of Detroit or Flint or Pontiac and other areas where they're saying, oh my God, this charter school did it. Well, yeah, because the DeVosses and everybody is basically trying to make it into a for-profit scheme. And so I just really urge all of you that are listening, I'm going to say it again, people like us need to run for office. That's how we really are going to be able to transform. But on top of that, as we're leading these movement work, just know that it is going to require the agitation, but the agitation that sometimes takes a lot of courage. But I love what Danielle Atkinson said, because it really hit home and made me smile, is to bring that joy with us. That it's okay, that we are going to be joyful when we do it and bringing our culture. I think doing it that way, it also inspires our children that we're doing the right thing and we're moving forward and we're doing it with a smile and we're doing it in a way that, that we don't feel like, hey, this is us versus them. This is about all of us. So I think it's really critically important.
It's so beautiful. And Congresswoman, you are the epitome of bringing fierce joy into the work. You're showing what can happen when you know who you're fighting for and who you're fighting with. I admire you. I appreciate you. I support you, Congresswoman, and thank you so much for your partnership and you're the fountain of inspiration, and you lead the way. So thank you for joining us today. I appreciate
you. Thank you, Aimee, for creating the space for us.
And I just want to also thank our co-hosts, Mothering Justice, Detroit Hispanic Development Coalition, Economic Security Project, and the incredible women of color that lead in Michigan that were with us today to talk about their own personal experiences, their personal activism, and how their experience qualifies them. I hope every single one of them runs for office. I hope you run for office. The country needs us and we need each other. I also want to thank State Senators Stephanie Chang, Ebony Taylor, Michelle Cohen, Danielle Atkinson, Aimee Russell, Angie Reyes, Cindy Gamboa. You are amazing. And women of color will determine the election in 47 days. The outcome of the election in Michigan, and by the way, the outcome of the White House and the Senate races, as well as down ballot. No one can win without our enthusiastic support. And I encourage you, if you have not done so far, check your registration status at shethepeople.org. We have tools, we have information. It's all there for you. We want to make sure you're on the voter rolls, you're registered, and then you have a plan to vote. Don't think about Election Day as November 3rd. Think of election season starting in just a couple of weeks, beginning with early voting, and make sure to get your ballot in early. It matters. And I'm so proud to be here. And on behalf of the She the People team, on behalf of all of our partners, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.